Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Karen Kennedy, for those of you who don't recognize this face after a year in isolation. And I want to introduce Ido Aharoni, who plays many roles in my life, which I'll get to in a moment. Ido has graciously given us some time today to address the current state of affair from an international perspective, from his view. But let me tell you a little bit about him. He serves as a global distinguished professor for the international relations at NYU, New York's University Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. He's a guest lecturer at Tel Aviv University Collier School of Management. He's co-founder of Emerson Rigby, managing partner of an investment company, EA2K, member of the International Council of APCO Worldwide, senior advisor at a private investment firm, Value Base, a global ambassador for the Maccabi World Union, senior advisor to ad tech company Perion Network, member of the board of governors of Tel Aviv University, global advisor to MasterCard, co-founder and global ambassador to the Genius 100 Visions curated community, and chairman of the Charney Forum for New Diplomacy, and that's what he does in the morning. In the afternoon and in the evening, he is my brother-in-law. So I've known Ido a very, very long time, and I so appreciate him giving us half an hour of his time today. Ido, without further ado, and much love, I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. It's such a pleasure to be with you and with your colleagues, and we don't have a lot of time, so let me, just before I apologize for the sirens, this is New York. I just landed here after a very long transatlantic flight, and so forgive me for New York's ambient sound, right? This is like the urban noise of New York that we know and we love so much, and I also have a very strong connection to LA. My wife is Karen's sister, also born and raised in LA. So let's talk a little bit about the future. We don't know a lot about the future, but what we do know is that the assumptions that were made that brought us thus far are no longer valid. What do we know? We know that life expectancy, which was only 100 years ago, under 60, is going to be around 95 for my unborn grandchildren. The system, especially the social safety network, never really counted on those missing 30 to 40 years. Therefore, in many countries, especially in Western countries, the pension systems, the social security systems are not going to be able to withstand this tremendous gap. No one was counting. Well, let me give you an example. In Israel, we pay the salaries and the pensions of 2.5 military forces. Although we have only one military force in place serving, but we're paying pensions for 2.5 forces. And obviously the situation is not sustainable. The same thing goes for Social Security in the United States. The second thing that we know about the future is that the job market as we know it is going to be very, very different because of the introduction of artificial intelligence, automation, robotics. We'll talk all about that. And of course, COVID-19 accelerated all those trends. And lastly, we do know that if today we have 7.5 billion people, we're expected to be 10 billion by 2050, and 70% of those 10 billion people are going to congregate in major urban centers. Even now, in the United States, the vast majority of the population congregates in 100 major urban centers. So that much we know about the future, meaning the old social contract, the social contract that emerged after the French Revolution, that was redefined by von Bismarck, late 19th century. He's the one who set the retirement age, by the way, and was really accelerated by the whole conversation about workers' rights that started late 19th century, early 20th century, right here in the United States. That conversation, that social contract will have to be redesigned, recalibrated, and redrafted. Now, COVID-19, unfortunately, served as the perfect storm for many reasons, but the chief among them is the fact that it exposed systemic deficiencies and weaknesses, even in countries like China, where we don't see, they're not transparent to us. But rest assured that in every country, there were deficiencies, there were weaknesses, there were failures for the very simple reason no one was prepared to handle the pandemic. Not only that, the pandemic exposed the true nature of political leadership. The people attracted to politics today are not necessarily people that you would hire to work for you. These are people with serious, in some cases, serious personality disorders, such as compulsive behavior, narcissism, paranoia, and what have you. If you're interested in the subject, please read Gerald Post's book, Politics and Narcissism, Dreams of Glory. Gerald Post of George Washington University was the head of psychological assessment for the CIA. And tragically, he died 3 months ago at the age of 86 of COVID-19. And so information overload, which is another facet of the crisis, our brain was never designed to handle such volume of information. Our brain was never designed to handle so many stimulations simultaneously. At most, we can handle 3 to 4 stimulations simultaneously. The whole notion of multitasking is a fiction. Multitasking doesn't really exist. What happens if you try to multitask is that you are lowering the level of your performance. Now, information overload increases anxiety, because when people are overwhelmed, they're anxious. When people are anxious, what do? They do 2 things. The first thing that they do, they're looking for simple answers for highly complex problems. Hence, Brexit, hence the Mexican Wall, and so on and so forth. The second thing they do, they have a tendency to be around people that are like them. We call it like-mindedness, hence digital tribalism. So the people that marched on Capitol Hill on January 6th may have never met each other personally, but they were like-minded people. They share the same belief. The people that read the New York Times, they're like-minded people, and so on and so forth. The world is built around millions and millions of digital tribes like that. This is another process that was severely accelerated by COVID-19. COVID-19 also pushed us into an inevitable clash. So far, this clash has not been too violent. There were some cases of violence, but this could definitely be a violent clash between 2 approaches, 2 worldviews. One that says COVID-19 was a way for the universe to tell us to take a timeout. We've been abusing the universe. Let's reform the system. And the other voice that says, the other approach, let's go back to the situation that preceded COVID-19. We had robust economy, and they will say, let's not forget that we were all doing extremely well before COVID-19. And so while one school of thought will push for a more robust climate change conversation, a push and a drive to more responsible consumption, companies will have to declare their purpose. Making money will not be the only legitimate purpose of businesses. And of course, countries, very similar to what happened after World War II, countries and international organizations will be required to engage in a more collaborative form of international relations. But then the other pushback, the other force will push back and will say, don't forget that globalization and global travel were the carriers and the agents of the pandemic. No coincidence that New York was hit hard early on, because New York is the gateway to America. They advocate even isolationism, certainly anti-immigration, and nationalism combined with populism and so on. The clash between those 2 forces is not only taking place in the United States, it's taking place in Israel, it's taking place even in a place like Canada, that we have a tendency to think of Canada as a place of peace and tranquility, but there's a lot of pushback going on underneath the surface. What are the macro trends that we are more likely to see in months and definitely years to come? I would urge all of you to look at the recovery process from COVID-19 in a similar way to the recovery process from World War II, because the problem here is not so much the medical issue. Here I come from, I just landed from Israel today. I can tell you in Israel, 60% of the population is already fully vaccinated. And we are well on our way to full recovery. But the real problem is the economic devastation. The economic devastation is a result of a political decision to embrace lockdown as the main solution. Lockdown may be a solution, only temporary one. It's not a long-term strategic sustainable solution. And the economic devastation that we're seeing all over the world is a result of the lockdown, not so much the result of the actual medical impact of the virus. So what are we going to see? We're going to see a big push for major infrastructure investments. You'll see governments printing money. They're already started. You'll see a quick shift to what we call flex economy. Big part of flex economy is gig economy that is going to impact your business directly, already started to impact your business. We will see again a push for collaboration. We'll see a push for online platform, payment platform, even building and shopping centers managements will shift to those little devices, and we will see less and less cash, for the main reason that cash is the number one transmitter of germs and viruses in our world, especially dollar bills. And lastly, competition, especially places that relied on tourism. For example, France, with its 80 million tourists a year, or Spain, with its 70 million tourists a year. Barcelona, for example, was facing an opposite problem before COVID-19. It was called over-tourism. They had too many tourists. They had to put tactics in place to push them out, not to accept tourists. They had a problem called over-tourism, which is a very rare problem. Now, places that traditionally rely heavily on tourism are going to engage in a fierce competition. And the competition is not just going to be over our money, it's going to be over our attention, because we will be able to travel to places digitally and remotely, and it's already happening. I'd like to bring to your attention a person who really can be described as a prophet. I will not be surprised if he will win the Nobel Prize in Physics. His name is Albert Laszlo Barabashi. He's a Hungarian-born Northeastern University physicist who wrote the book Linked in 2002. In his book Linked, which he described as the new science of networks, he basically looked at how networks behave in nature and equated that to how the internet is behaving. And his argument was very compelling. He said that the structure of a network is far more formidable than an organizational hierarchy. A network is indestructible. If you destroy a piece of a building, the building is going to collapse, a piece of the foundation. But if you destroy a piece of the network will continue to function. So the network is not only stronger because it's more elastic, it's safer, it's relatively inexpensive, it allows you a larger degree of maneuverability and flexibility. How does it translate into your world? Very, very simply, organizational structures are going to change from hierarchy to network. What does it mean? Organizations will work with task force. The task forces will not necessarily have one office, one building, or one location. They can be all over the world. I'm working with a company, APCO Worldwide, which has been working like that for many, many years. You put together the task force based on the specialization of the employees and not necessarily on their location. And you put together the team, you give the head of the task force the decision-making capabilities to hire, to allocate budget, to manage the process, and he reports back to head HQ. That's going to be the new structure. It's already happening, even in governments. They start working based on the idea of a tight network rather than an organizational hierarchy. Another big factor that will affect your business. My friend, Professor Nick Cull of USC, coined the term reputational security. What does it mean? It means that the stronger your reputation is, the more protected you are, whether as a brand, as a company, as a building, as a developer, as an entity that is in the financial world. Your reputation is part and parcel with your safety and security. So when you're looking at urban decay, places that are chronically dirty, untidy, places that are chronically unable to take care of their own back allies. Uh, um, Here you have an opposite example of Tel Aviv skyline, which is a beautiful example. Those places are going to face an uphill battle on the road to recovery. How places can and should recover from COVID-19. The first thing is they have to put an obvious emphasis on cleanliness. They have to engage in partnerships. So, for example, if you're San Diego and LA, you have to partner in order to attract people to Southern California. Tel Aviv and Jerusalem are already doing that, although Tel Aviv and Jerusalem are two separate brands. One is about the past, one is about the future, yet they're engaged in partnerships. You have to give priority to your local market first. In national travel, we call it domestic travel first. In regional travel, we call it local travel first. You have to be able to put in place a set of incentives to encourage and entice people to open their businesses and basically start competing. Because once you're out there, if you own a restaurant, once you're out there, if you own a store, a liquor store, or any other department store, there's no way back. Once you're up and running, you have to continue. Embrace micro-targeting when it comes to marketing. Above the line doesn't make any sense anymore. Buying a billboard doesn't make any sense. Why? Because you have to guess whether it was effective or not. They tell you, yeah, if you put this billboard on the 405, we know how many cars, but who guarantees that eyeballs are going to be exposed to your billboard? But when you use micro-targeting, meaning an advertising solution, we call it advertising or campaign journey for the mobile device, you get a very precise picture of how many people were exposed to your message, how many people stayed on your message, how many people were converted to action, and so on and so forth. And your dollar that you invest in marketing is much better spent when you embrace what we call below the line marketing technologies and tactics from the school of thought called micro-targeting. Flex employment is a big part of recovery. The ability to take a group of people who are right now unemployed, let's say people from the hotel industry, and train them very quickly to be able to provide vaccinations, train them very quickly to become social workers, train them very quickly to become hospital nurses or any other healthcare medical staff and so on. The ability to shift groups of people from one sector to another will not only help them, but also may save the economy. And lastly, COVID-19's biggest damage is that it had eroded the trust between people and government. It had eroded the trust between people and big brands like Facebook, like Google, and so on. It eroded the trust in almost every aspect of our lives. One of the ways to rebuild the trust is by adopting measures of transparency, meaning look at your client as a participant first. Again, from USC, a professor by the name of Henry Jenkins coined the term participatory culture. Henry Jenkins is saying something very simple. He's saying that we can no longer view the consumer as a passive entity. There is no more patient, client, consumer, or voter, or resident. We should describe all of those people using an entirely different word, participants, because we live in the age of participation. And when you choose to take an Uber or one of those shared economy vehicles in Southern California, you're actually make a decision to participate in gig economy. And if you rent a room through Airbnb, you are a participant. And certainly, if you're posting a comment on travel advisory or trip advisory or Yelp or whatever platform there is, the point is that transparency is key to rebuild trust, and trust is key in the process to recovery. In terms of the future of work, obviously, it's remote. It's never going to come back to what it used to be. I can tell you again from my own experience, it's not that office spaces are gone forever. They're not. They will stay with us, but it will be a combination, some sort of a hybrid solution between remote work and on-location work. Obviously, what you're seeing with e-commerce, micro-targeting, consumption of information online, the bandwidth, it's only going to increase, of course, with the introduction of 5G, which is going to be a game changer in terms of the bandwidth. Alternative education, you'll be seeing a very interesting process that will affect directly the future of work, whereas big players like Google, Amazon, Apple will begin to provide their own professional credentials. They will not necessarily rely on university credentials. I think that the crisis is already here, the crisis in higher learning. Universities from tier 2 and tier 3 that do not have a large endowment funds will have to face a major crisis, possibly even an existential crisis. Automation, artificial intelligence, we discussed that. It's going to happen faster than we think. Freelance economy creates a problem because it would diminish workers' rights. On one hand, on the other hand, will allow a lot more flexibility to the employer. So this is it. We are in the midst of this whole thing. These are very, very exciting times. Science will always defeat the viruses. I can promise you that. When you look historically, pandemics are less and less of a problem. I know it sounds a little too optimistic now when half the country is in lockdown and the economy is facing an unprecedented devastation. But if you will look at the history of pandemics in the last 1,500 years, you will see that slowly but surely science was able to defeat all the viruses and all the pandemics. And I think there are very, very good reasons to believe that COVID-19 is the last big pandemic in history. And on this optimistic note, I'd like to give it back to my dear sister-in-law, Karen Kennedy.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Ido. And thank you to our participants and attendees. The recording of this link will be up on the NAS Investment Solutions website within a couple of days, and that's nasinvestmentsolutions.com. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to use the Q&A feature. Now we will get in touch with you after the webinar concludes. Thank you so much, everyone.